The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the windswept prairie as Valerie Norton stood frozen in her doorway, staring at the 5 horsemen approaching her isolated homestead. Even from a distance, she recognized them, her late husband's friends, men who had once sat at her table and shared stories over whiskey. Now they were coming to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs, her land, her home, and perhaps even her. North Dakota Territory, 1878. Valerie had been a widow for exactly 6 months. The memory of burying Robert still felt fresh, the dirt on his grave barely settled. At 32, she hadn't expected to be alone on their homestead outside of Fargo, struggling to keep the small ranch operational as winter approached. She retreated inside the modest cabin and reached for the rifle above the fireplace. Her hands trembled as she loaded it, remembering Robert's words. "If anything happens to me, Val, don't trust my business partners, not even Williams." Especially not Williams. At the time, she dismissed his concerns as paranoia. Now, as dust clouds rose behind approaching horses, his warnings echoed in her mind with terrible clarity. The homestead was secluded, nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills with the nearest neighbor over 2 miles away. Robert had chosen the location for its beauty and the creek that ran year-round, a valuable asset in this sometimes unforgiving territory. In the months since his passing, Valerie had learned that the property held more value than she'd initially understood. There were rumors of a railroad planning to cut through the eastern edge of their land, which would multiply its worth overnight. Valerie moved to the window, watching the riders draw closer. The evening light caught on their gun belts as they approached. She recognized Elijah Williams at the front, her husband's former business partner and supposedly closest friend. Behind him rode the others, the Hollister brothers, Sam Carson and Thomas Reed. All men who had dined in her home, who had clapped Robert on the back and called him brother. She knew what they wanted. 3 days ago, Williams had come alone, speaking in soft, reasonable tones about how a woman couldn't manage such a property by herself, offering to buy her out for a fraction of what the land was worth. When she refused, his demeanor had changed, his voice hardening as he reminded her that Robert had borrowed money from all of them for his last cattle venture, a venture that failed when the herd contracted fever and died before reaching market. "We've been patient, Mrs. Norton," he had said. "But our patience has limits." Now they were coming to collect, one way or another. Valerie's heart hammered against her ribs as she considered her options. She could barricade herself inside and hope they'd leave, but instinct told her these men wouldn't be dissuaded so easily. She could fire warning shots, but that would only provoke them. Or she could run, but where? In the gathering darkness with nowhere to go. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm her, the sound of approaching hoofbeats came from the opposite direction, not from the main road, but from the trail that led through the western woods. A lone rider emerged from between the pines, tall in the saddle, moving at an unhurried pace. Valerie squinted through the window, trying to make out the newcomer. He was a stranger to her, broad-shouldered and lean, with a dark hat pulled low over his face. He rode directly toward her cabin, apparently oblivious to the approaching party from the other direction. The stranger dismounted at her porch, tying his horse to the rail with deliberate movements. He glanced toward the approaching riders, then turned to the door and knocked firmly. With the rifle still in her hands, Valerie cautiously opened the door a crack. "Evening, madam," the man said, his voice deep and even. "Name's Xavier Zane. I understand you might be in need of some assistance." His eyes were startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, steady as they met hers. Before she could respond, he glanced over his shoulder at the approaching riders. "Those men coming to pay a social call?" he asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "They were my husband's friends," Valerie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they're not here for friendly reasons." The stranger Xavier nodded slightly. "I see. Well, Mrs. Norton, Valerie Norton, Mrs. Norton, if you'd permit me, I believe I might be of some help in this situation." "Why would you help me? I don't know you." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Let's just say I've had some experience with men like those." He nodded toward the approaching riders. "And I've never been fond of seeing 5 men corner one woman." The riders were close enough now that Valerie could make out William's scowl as he spotted Xavier. She hesitated only a moment before stepping back. "Come in, Mr. Zane." He shook his head. "Thank you, but I believe I'll wait out here. Best I meet these gentlemen before they reach your doorstep." His voice remained calm, but she noticed his right hand resting casually near the holster at his hip. "They're armed," she warned. "So am I," he replied simply. Valerie watched as Xavier Zane positioned himself on her porch, leaning against a support post with deceptive casualness. Despite his relaxed posture, there was something in his stance that radiated readiness, a coiled tension that reminded her of a mountain lion she'd once seen poised on a ridge, watching and waiting. Williams and his men slowed their approach as they noticed Xavier. They stopped their horses about 20 yards from the porch, spreading out slightly in what Valerie recognized as a tactical formation. "Evening, gentlemen," Xavier called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. Williams ignored him, focusing instead on Valerie, who stood partially hidden behind the half-open door. "Mrs. Norton," Williams called, "I see you found yourself some company. Didn't take long to replace Robert, did it?" Valerie felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could respond, Xavier spoke. "The lady and I have only just become acquainted," he said. "But I'm curious what business brings 5 armed men to call on a widow at sunset." Williams shifted in his saddle. "This doesn't concern you, stranger." "Our business is with Mrs. Norton." "Is that so?" Xavier straightened slightly. "Well, as Mrs. Norton seems reluctant to speak with you all at once, perhaps you'd care to state your business and I can relay the message." The Hollister brothers exchanged glances and Sam Carson spat on the ground. Thomas Reed's hand drifted toward his holster. William's expression darkened. "Listen here. Mrs. Norton's husband died owing us a considerable sum. We've been patient, but our patience has run out. We're here to collect what's owed." "And how do you propose to collect from a widow who's working this land on her own?" Xavier asked, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of steel. "The land will cover it," Williams said flatly. "She can't manage it anyway. A woman alone has no business trying to run a ranch." Valerie stepped fully into the doorway, her rifle visible but pointed downward. "This is my home, Elijah. Robert and I built it together. I'm not leaving." Williams laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Be reasonable, Valerie. You know as well as I do that Robert was in deep. The money he borrowed from us is gone with those cattle. What do you expect us to do? Just walk away from what he owed?" Xavier shifted his weight, drawing all eyes back to him. "If there's a debt to be settled, there are proper channels. The courts, for instance." "We don't need courts out here," the younger Hollister brother sneered. "Besides," Williams added, "we've got Robert's word in writing. He put up this land as collateral." This was news to Valerie, and her face must have shown it because Williams smiled thinly. "He didn't tell you." "Not surprising. Robert always did shield you from the harsher realities." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "It's all legal and binding, signed and witnessed." Valerie felt as if the ground were shifting beneath her. Robert had never mentioned using their land as collateral. Could Williams be bluffing? but the confidence in his manner suggested otherwise. Xavier held out his hand. "May I see this document?" Williams hesitated, then nudged his horse forward, extending the paper. As Xavier reached for it, Williams suddenly pulled back. "Who exactly are you anyway? And what's your interest in Mrs. Norton's affairs?" Xavier's expression remained neutral. "Just a traveler who doesn't care for the odds I'm seeing. 5 armed men against 1 woman doesn't strike me as particularly honorable." Thomas Reid, the quietest of the group, finally spoke. "We don't want trouble, we just want what's owed." "At gunpoint?" Xavier questioned. "We came prepared," Williams said coldly. "Robert's widow has proven stubborn." "Perhaps with good reason," Xavier replied. He turned slightly toward Valerie but kept his eyes on the men. "Mrs. Norton, did your husband ever mention using this land as collateral for a loan?" Valerie's mind raced, trying to recall any conversation that might have hinted at such an arrangement. "No," she finally said. "He never mentioned anything of the sort, and I co-own this land. Any agreement involving it would require my signature as well." William's face tightened. "That's not how Robert understood it. Now, I've been patient, but my patience is wearing thin. Either you agree to sell to us at the price I offered, which is generous considering the circumstances, or we'll be forced to take more direct action." Xavier took a single step forward. The movement was subtle, but somehow changed the entire dynamic of the standoff. "I believe the lady has made her position clear. She's not selling." "And who are you to make that decision?" Williams demanded. "I'm not making any decisions," Xavier replied calmly. "Mrs. Norton has already made hers. I'm simply ensuring her wishes are respected." The tension in the air was palpable. Valerie could see the calculation in Williams' eyes as he assessed the situation. 5 against 1 should have been favorable odds, but something about Xavier Zane's demeanor gave Williams pause. After a long, tense moment, Williams gathered his reins. "This isn't over, Valerie. Not by a long shot. We'll return with the sheriff next time." "Feel free," Xavier said. "I'm sure the sheriff would be interested to hear about 5 armed men threatening a widow." William's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. He jerked his horse around. "Let's go," he barked to the others. "We'll settle this another way." The group retreated, dust rising behind them as they rode away. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Xavier turn to face Valerie fully. "They'll be back," he said simply. Valerie nodded, finally lowering the rifle. "I know." She studied him openly now. "How did you know I needed help? Who sent you?" Xavier removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "No one sent me exactly. I've been tracking Williams and his associates for some time. Our paths were bound to cross eventually. Tracking them? Why?" His expression grew distant. "Let's just say we have unfinished business." He glanced at the darkening sky. "It'll be night soon. Do you have somewhere safe you can go, a neighbor's place perhaps?" Valerie straightened her shoulders. "This is my home, Mr. Zane. I'm not being driven from it by threats." A smile ghosted across his face. "I suspected you might say that." He replaced his hat. "In that case, if you don't object, I'll make camp nearby. Those men might reconsider their retreat once darkness falls." Valerie hesitated. Inviting a stranger to stay, even one who had just stood between her and danger, went against every cautious instinct she possessed. Yet something about Xavier Zane inspired trust, despite his obvious dangerous qualities. "There's no need for you to camp outside," she finally said. "The barn has a decent loft with clean straw. It's not much, but it's better than the open ground." Xavier studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you, I accept your offer." He untied his horse from the rail. "I'll see to my horse and then do a quick patrol of your property boundaries. It's best to know all approaches if trouble returns. As he led his horse toward the barn, Valerie called after him. "Mr. Zane." He turned back. "Thank you," she said simply. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Norton. I have a feeling this situation is just beginning." Valerie watched him walk away, questions swirling in her mind. Who exactly was Xavier Zane? And what unfinished business did he have with Williams and his men? More importantly, could she truly trust him, or had she merely exchanged one danger for another? As darkness settled over the prairie, Valerie moved about her cabin lighting lamps and preparing a simple supper. The routine tasks helped calm her nerves, but her mind kept returning to the confrontation on her porch and the mysterious man who had intervened. She was setting bread and stew on the table when a knock came at the door. Despite expecting it, she started, nearly dropping the pot. "Mrs. Norton," Xavier's deep voice called from outside. "May I come in?" Valerie straightened her apron and smoothed her hair before opening the door. Xavier stood on the porch, hat in hand. He'd washed up, his face clean of trail dust, dark hair damp at the temples. "I've checked the perimeter," he said. "No sign of your visitors returning, but I've hobbled my horse in a position where he'll alert us if anyone approaches." "Thank you," she said, stepping back. "I've made supper if you'd care to join me." Something like surprise flickered across his face. "That's kind of you." Inside, Xavier removed his gun belt and hung it on a peg near the door within easy reach, Valerie noted, but a gesture of respect nonetheless. He took the seat she indicated, waiting until she was seated before reaching for the bread. "This is good stew," he said after several bites. "Reminds me of my mother's." "Where is home for you, Mr. Zane?" Valerie asked, studying him across the table. He chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Originally Missouri, but I haven't called anywhere home for some years now. A drifter then." His blue eyes met hers directly. "I prefer to think of myself as a man with purpose, Mrs. Norton. My path simply requires mobility." "And what purpose brings you to my doorstep precisely when I needed help?" Xavier set down his spoon. "As I mentioned, I've been following Williams and his associates. I knew they were pressuring a widow near Fargo about some land. I didn't know it was you until today. Why are you tracking them?" She pressed. He was silent for a long moment. "They're not the honorable businessmen they pretend to be. Their pattern is consistent: find vulnerable landowners, manufacture or exaggerate debts, then force them off their land through intimidation or worse. They've done it successfully at least 3 times that I know of." Valerie's stomach tightened. "You think the document Williams mentioned is a forgery? Possibly. Or perhaps your husband signed something under duress or deception." Xavier leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about your husband, Mrs. Norton. What kind of man was he?" The question caught her off guard. She looked down at her half-eaten meal, memories flooding back. "Robert was principled, hardworking. He had dreams of building something that would last generations." A sad smile touched her lips. "He was kind sometimes to a fault, too trusting perhaps." "How did he die?" Xavier asked quietly. "An accident. He was breaking a new horse. The animal spooked at something, a snake, we think, and threw him. He struck his head on a rock." Valerie swallowed hard. "He never regained consciousness." "Were Williams and the others around when this happened?" The question startled her. "Elijah was. He helped bring Robert home." She frowned, a memory surfacing. "In fact, he was the only one with Robert when it happened. He said they were discussing business while Robert worked with the horse." Xavier's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes sharpened. "And this was when?" 6 months ago. Early May. "And when did Robert supposedly borrow this money using your land as collateral?" Valerie thought back to William's visits. "According to Elijah, the loan was made in March for the cattle purchase." The herd was lost in April. Xavier nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself. And the cattle, did you see them yourself? Yes, of course. Robert was so proud when they arrived. Nearly 50 head of prime beef stock. Her brow furrowed. Why all these questions, Mr. Zane? He set down his cup. Because pieces of this story don't fit together properly, Mrs. Norton. And in my experience, when facts don't align, someone is usually hiding something. You think Williams is lying about the loan? I think it's worth investigating, Xavier replied carefully. Do you have access to your husband's business records? Account books, correspondence, contracts. Valerie nodded slowly. In his desk. I haven't gone through everything yet. It was difficult after he passed. Understanding softened Xavier's gaze. Of course, but if you're willing, those records might tell us what we need to know. After supper, Valerie led Xavier to the small study Robert had built off the main room. A roll-top desk stood against one wall, its surface neat but covered with a thin layer of dust. She hadn't been able to bring herself to disturb his things, as if maintaining them exactly as he'd left them somehow kept a part of him alive. With a deep breath, she rolled back the top, revealing compartments filled with papers, ledgers, and correspondence. Everything should be here, she said, stepping back. Robert was meticulous about his records. Xavier approached the desk respectfully. May I? At her nod, he began carefully examining the papers, setting them in organized piles as he worked. Valerie watched, impressed by his methodical approach. His hands, she noticed, were strong but surprisingly dexterous, handling the fragile papers with care. After nearly an hour, Xavier sat back. Mrs. Norton, according to these records, your husband did borrow money from Williams and his associates, but a much smaller amount than they're claiming, and with very different terms. He showed her a contract dated February of that year. This shows a loan of $500 to be repaid with 10% interest after the cattle sale. Nowhere does it mention your land as collateral. Valerie leaned closer. That's Robert's signature, and there, she pointed to a notation at the bottom. That's his handwriting too. Paid in full April 12th. That was right before the cattle fell sick. Xavier's expression grew grim. Which means either this document is falsified, unlikely, given that it's in your husband's handwriting, or Williams is attempting to defraud you with a different, possibly forged agreement. But why would Williams do this? He was Robert's friend for years. $500 plus interest is one thing. Your land, especially with a railroad potentially coming through, is worth far more. Xavier tapped another document he'd found. According to this survey map, your property controls access to the best water source for miles. That alone makes it valuable. Valerie sank into a chair, trying to absorb the implications. You think Williams deliberately lied about the debt to force me off my land? I think it's likely. And I suspect his involvement in your husband's death might not have been as innocent as it appeared. The suggestion sent a chill through her. You can't mean, I'm not accusing anyone of murder, not without proof, Xavier said carefully. But convenient accidents have a way of happening around men like Williams when large sums of money are involved. Valerie pressed a hand to her mouth, memories reassembling themselves in a new, darker pattern. Robert had been acting strangely in the weeks before he died. Worried. He told me not to trust Williams if anything happened to him, but I thought he was just being overcautious. Your husband's instincts were sound, Xavier said quietly. The question now is what Williams will do next. He won't give up easily, not with so much at stake. What can I do? It's my word against 5 men, all respected in the community. Xavier gathered the relevant documents. Evidence speaks louder than reputations, Mrs. Norton. These papers contradict Williams' claims. And I suspect if we look into those other properties they acquired, we might find similar inconsistencies. We should take this to Sheriff Tanner, Valerie suggested. Xavier's expression turned cautious. Perhaps, but first, I'd like to know where the sheriff's loyalties lie. Small-town law enforcement can sometimes have complicated relationships with influential citizens. The realization of how precarious her position was settled heavily on Valerie's shoulders. So, what do we do? For tonight, we remain vigilant, Xavier said, rising from the desk. Tomorrow, I'll ride into town and make some discreet inquiries about the sheriff. I'll also see what I can learn about these other properties Williams has acquired. He moved toward the door, then hesitated. Mrs. Norton, I believe you're in genuine danger. Williams and his men won't simply walk away from something this valuable. I suggest you consider leaving, at least temporarily, until we can resolve this situation. Valerie straightened her spine. This is my home, Mr. Zane. I won't be driven from it by lies and threats. A smile touched his lips. I had a feeling you'd say that. His expression grew serious again. In that case, I hope you won't object if I continue to impose on your hospitality. I don't think you should be alone right now. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. The barn loft remains at your disposal, Mr. Zane, she said softly. He nodded. Thank you. I'll check the property once more before turning in. He paused at the door. Lock up behind me, Mrs. Norton, and keep that rifle close. After Xavier left, Valerie secured the doors and windows, then prepared for bed with her husband's rifle propped against the nightstand. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams troubled by images of Robert falling, of Williams watching with cold calculation, of land changing hands through forged signatures. She woke before dawn to the sound of a horse whinnying in alarm. Grabbing her robe and the rifle, she hurried to the window. In the pale pre-dawn light, she could make out Xavier moving swiftly from the barn toward the house, his gun drawn. A sudden flare of orange light erupted from the far end of her property fire, catching quickly in the dry autumn grass. As she watched in horror, a second fire sprang up in the opposite direction. They were being surrounded by flames. Xavier reached the porch just as Valerie opened the door, his expression grim. They're trying to smoke us out, he said without preamble. Fires set at strategic points around the property. With the wind picking up, they'll reach the house within the hour. Fear gripped Valerie's heart. My home, get dressed, Xavier cut in, his tone allowing no argument. Pack only what you can carry on horseback. We need to move quickly. But Mrs. Norton, Valerie, listen to me. This is no random fire. This is deliberate. They're watching, waiting for us to flee. If we stay, we burn. If we run blindly, we ride straight into their trap. The urgency in his voice spurred her into action. She dressed hastily, stuffing essential items into a saddlebag, Robert's documents, a change of clothes, the photograph of her parents, her mother's locket. As she worked, her mind raced. This was her home, built with Robert's hands in her heart. The thought of losing it felt like losing him all over again. When she emerged, Xavier was leading 2 horses, his own and her mare, already saddled. The fire's moving faster than I anticipated, he said, helping her secure her bag to the saddle. We need to go now, but not by the main trail. They'll be watching it. There's a creek path through the north woods, Valerie said, mounting her horse. It's overgrown but passable. Xavier nodded. Perfect. Lead the way, but stay low and move quickly. As they rode away from the cabin, Valerie couldn't help looking back. The fires had merged into a wall of flame, consuming the dry grass with frightening speed. Smoke billowed into the dawn sky, and she thought she glimpsed figures moving at the edge of the property, men on horseback, watching. The creek path was as she remembered, though narrower. Low-hanging branches forced them to duck as they followed the winding course of the water. The trees provided cover from watchful eyes, but progress was slow. "Where does this path lead?" Xavier asked, voice low as he rode close behind her. "Eventually to the Wilson homestead, but they're back east visiting family. The place is empty right now. All the better. We need somewhere to regroup and plan our next move." They rode in tense silence, the sound of the crackling fire fading behind them, replaced by the quiet rustling of leaves and the steady clip of hooves on soft earth. Valerie's thoughts were a tumult of fear, anger, and uncertainty. What would be left of her home? How could Williams resort to such destructive tactics? And what would she do now? As if sensing her distress, Xavier spoke. "I'm sorry about your home, Valerie, but structures can be rebuilt. Lives can't be replaced." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. The simple truth of his words provided little comfort now, but she recognized their wisdom. After nearly an hour of careful navigation through increasingly dense woodland, they emerged into a small clearing. A modest cabin stood at its center, smoke-stained chimney rising above a shake roof badly in need of repair. "The Wilson place," Valerie confirmed, dismounting stiffly. Xavier surveyed the area with a practiced eye. "Defensible enough. Let's get the horses around back, out of sight from the main trail." Inside, the cabin was dusty but intact. Simple furnishings, a table, chairs, a bed in the corner stood ready for the owner's return. Valerie moved about, opening shutters to let in light while Xavier checked the perimeter. "No sign of pursuit yet," he reported, returning. "But they'll be searching once the fire burns itself out." Valerie sank into a chair, the full weight of her situation finally settling on her shoulders. "I've lost everything," she whispered. Xavier knelt before her, his blue eyes intent on hers. "Not everything. You have your life. You have proof of William's fraud, and you have an ally who intends to see justice done." Something in his steady gaze anchored her, providing a point of stability in her crumbling world. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Zane? What's your stake in this?" He was silent for a moment. "Williams and his men destroyed someone I cared about. My sister and her husband owned a small ranch in Wyoming Territory. Williams approached them with a business proposition similar to what he likely offered your husband. When they refused, accidents began happening. Cattle disappeared. A barn burned." His jaw tightened. "Eventually, my sister's husband was found dead, supposedly thrown from his horse." Understanding dawned. "Like Robert," Xavier nodded. "My sister tried to hold on to the ranch, but alone, with 2 small children and mounting debts she supposedly owed Williams. She couldn't fight them. She was forced to sell for a fraction of the property's worth. The strain broke her health. She died last winter." Valerie reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "I'm so sorry." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "I've been tracking Williams and his operation since then. They're careful, clever. They operate just within the boundaries of the law, or at least maintain the appearance of doing so. But your situation is different." "How so?" "Your husband's records provide clear evidence of fraud, and now they've escalated to arson. That's not something even a corrupt sheriff can ignore." He stood, gently withdrawing his hand from hers. "Which is why we need to get those documents to someone with authority who can't be bought." "The federal marshal in Bismarck," Valerie suggested. "Marshal Donovan has a reputation for incorruptibility." "Bismarck is 3 days' hard ride," Xavier frowned, "and Williams will be watching the roads." "There's another way," Valerie said, an idea forming. "The river. Jacob Fisher runs a small steamer that makes regular trips between Fargo and Bismarck. He leaves tomorrow morning. Xavier considered this. A boat would be unexpected, but we'd have to reach Fargo without being seen. We can travel by night, Valerie suggested. I know these trails better than Williams and his men. A smile touched Xavier's lips. You continue to surprise me, Mrs. Norton. Valerie, she corrected. Under the circumstances, I think we can dispense with formalities. Valerie, he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. Then you must call me Xavier. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Valerie felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or anger, a sensation she hadn't experienced since Robert's death. It confused and unsettled her, coming as it did in the midst of such danger. Xavier broke the connection first, moving toward the window. We should rest while we can. Tonight will be a challenging ride. As the day progressed, they took turns keeping watch while the others slept. Xavier managed to snare a rabbit, which they roasted over a small, carefully tended fire. The simple meal restored some of Valerie's strength, though her thoughts continually returned to her burning homestead. You think anything survived? She asked as they ate. Xavier considered. Stone doesn't burn. The chimney will still be standing. The foundations. With those, rebuilding is possible. If I still own the land, she said bitterly. You will, he promised. Williams has overplayed his hand. This kind of violence leaves evidence that can't be hidden behind legal maneuvers. As dusk approached, they prepared to leave. Xavier checked and rechecked his weapons, while Valerie wrapped the precious documents in oilcloth to protect them from potential rain or river spray. Ready? Xavier asked as full darkness fell. Valerie nodded, squaring her shoulders. Ready. They set out under a moonless sky, relying on Valerie's intimate knowledge of the landscape to guide them. They avoided the main trails, instead following game paths and creek beds, moving as silently as possible through the night. Several times, Xavier signaled for a halt, his keen ears detecting sounds that Valerie missed, distant hoofbeats, voices carried on the wind. Each time they waited, motionless, until he deemed it safe to continue. They were within 5 miles of Fargo when disaster struck. As they crossed a small clearing, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering a tree trunk inches from Xavier's head. He reacted instantly, pulling Valerie from her saddle and down behind a fallen log. Stay down, he commanded, drawing his revolver. More shots followed, at least 2 different firearms. Xavier returned fire, his aim measured and deliberate. How many? Valerie whispered, clutching her saddlebag with the documents. At least 3, Xavier replied grimly. Probably scouts Williams sent to watch the approaches to town. A bullet thudded into the log protecting them, sending splinters flying. Their horses, spooked by the gunfire, had bolted into the darkness. We're pinned down, Xavier muttered, and without horses we're vulnerable. There's an old trapper's cabin about half a mile east, Valerie said urgently. If we could reach it, Xavier nodded. When I give the signal, run for the trees at the edge of the clearing. Don't stop, don't look back, I'll cover you. What about you? His blue eyes gleamed in the darkness. I'll be right behind you. Valerie's heart pounded as she prepared herself. Xavier fired 3 rapid shots, then shouted. Now she ran, crouching low, expecting at any moment to feel the burning impact of a bullet. The edge of the clearing seemed impossibly far, the darkness both threat and shield. Behind her, she heard Xavier's gun firing steadily, methodically, providing cover. She reached the tree line and ducked behind a thick trunk, gasping for breath. Turning back, she saw Xavier backing toward her position, firing as he moved. A cry of pain told her at least one of his shots had found its mark. Then he was beside her, reloading swiftly. "Which way to the cabin?" Valerie pointed east along a barely visible trail. They moved quickly through the underbrush, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant. Whether they had discouraged their attackers or simply outpaced them was unclear. The trapper's cabin was exactly as Valerie remembered, small, sturdy, and well hidden among the pines. They slipped inside, Xavier immediately moving to secure the single window and door. "Are you hit?" Valerie asked, suddenly noticing a dark stain on his sleeve. Xavier glanced down. "Just a graze. Nothing serious." But when she insisted on examining the wound in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, she found a deep furrow across his upper arm, bleeding steadily. "This needs tending," she said firmly. Using water from her canteen and strips torn from her petticoat, she cleaned and bandaged the wound as best she could. Xavier submitted to her ministrations without complaint, though she knew it must be painful. "You have a gentle touch," he remarked as she tied off the bandage. "I've had practice," she replied. "Life on a homestead comes with its share of injuries." Their faces were close in the darkness, and Valerie became acutely aware of his breathing, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. She stepped back, suddenly flustered. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "You're the one who's been shot defending me." A smile touched his lips. "For not giving up. Many would have, faced with what you've endured." Outside, the night had grown utterly still. No sounds of pursuit, no distant voices or hoofbeats. The silence was almost more unnerving than the earlier violence. "What now?" Valerie asked. "Without horses, we can't reach Fargo before dawn." Xavier moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "We're too vulnerable here. William's men know these woods. They'll be searching systematically." He turned back to her. "We need to change our plan." "How?" "Instead of taking the documents to Marshal Donovan in Bismarck, we bring him to us." Xavier explained his thinking. "Sheriff Tanner in Fargo may or may not be in William's pocket, but he's obligated to respond to reports of armed men and arson. If we can reach town and make a public accusation, it forces his hand." "And if he's corrupt?" Valerie asked. "Then we create enough of a stir that he can't simply dismiss us. Fargo isn't so large that 5 men can burn a woman's home without tongues wagging." It was a risky plan, but Valerie recognized its merits. Public accusations were harder to ignore than private appeals to justice. "We'll wait until first light," Xavier decided. "Moving through these woods in darkness invites ambush. At dawn, we make for Fargo by the most direct route." They settled in to wait, taking turns keeping watch while the other rested. During her watch, Valerie found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Xavier's sleeping form. Even in repose, there was a readiness about him, a coiled tension that spoke of a life spent facing danger. She wondered about the man behind the gunfighter's exterior, what dreams he might have had before violence claimed his sister, what kind of life he might have led in different circumstances. There was education in his speech, refinement in his manners despite the hardness of his eyes. When dawn lightened the eastern sky, Xavier stirred, instantly alert. They shared the last of their provisions, jerky and hardtack from Xavier's saddlebags, and prepared to move out. "Stay close," Xavier instructed as they left the cabin. "If we encounter trouble, do exactly as I say, without hesitation." They moved through the awakening forest, alert for any sign of pursuit. Birds resumed their morning songs, a deceptively peaceful counterpoint to their tense vigilance. They had covered perhaps 2 miles when Xavier suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Ahead, through the trees, they glimpsed movement on the trail horses, at least 4, moving slowly in their direction. "Back," Xavier whispered, guiding Valerie behind a dense thicket. "Quietly." They crouched low, barely breathing as the riders approached. Through gaps in the foliage, Valerie recognized the Hollister brothers and Sam Carson, along with a fourth man she didn't know. All were armed, rifles ready across their saddles. "They said they heard shots from this direction last night," the younger Hollister was saying. "Could have been the widow and that gunman." "If it was, they're on foot now," Carson replied. "Shouldn't be hard to track him down." "Williams wants the woman alive," the unidentified rider cautioned. "Says she's got papers that could cause problems." "What about the gunman?" asked the elder Hollister. "Dead is preferred," came the cold response. They passed within 20 feet of the hiding place, continuing down the trail. Only when the sound of hooves had faded did Xavier relax slightly. "They're between us and Fargo," he murmured. "We need to circle around them." "There's another way," Valerie said, thinking quickly. "The railroad camp. It's closer than town, maybe 3 miles northeast. There will be people there, witnesses." Xavier nodded. "Good thinking." "Lead the way, but carefully." They altered their course, moving through increasingly open country. Without the cover of dense forest, they were more exposed, but also able to see danger approaching. Several times they dropped flat in tall grass as riders passed in the distance. By mid-morning, they could hear the sounds of the railroad camp hammers striking steel, men shouting, the occasional blast as workers cleared obstacles from the planned route. The camp represented safety in numbers, but also a new challenge: how to enter without being seen by Williams' scouts. "There," Valerie pointed to a supply wagon approaching the camp from the east. "If we can reach that ravine before the wagon passes, we could use it as cover to approach the camp." They sprinted across open ground, hearts pounding, constantly scanning for threats. They reached the shallow ravine just as the wagon rumbled overhead on a crude bridge. Following the ravine, they worked their way closer to the camp until they were within shouting distance of the outer tents. As they prepared to make their final approach, hoofbeats sounded from behind. Xavier whirled, gun drawn, as 3 riders appeared at the ravine's edge. Above them, Williams himself, Thomas Reid, and the unknown rider from earlier. "Mrs. Norton," Williams called, his voice carrying easily in the morning air. "How fortunate to find you. We've been concerned for your safety since that terrible fire." The cold calculation in his eyes belied his solicitous words. Behind him, the railroad camp continued its activity, workers oblivious to the confrontation unfolding just beyond their perimeter. "Drop your weapon, Zane," Williams ordered, "or Reed will put a bullet in Mrs. Norton's head." Thomas Reed aimed his rifle at Valerie with an unwavering hand. Xavier's expression hardened, but he didn't lower his gun. 3 against 1 with a lady in the crossfire. Your usual odds, Williams. "Business is business," Williams replied coldly. "Now drop the gun or the widow joins her husband." Valerie saw the calculation in Xavier's eyes, the weighing of impossible options. He couldn't win this standoff, not against 3 armed men with elevated positions. "Xavier," she said softly. "Don't." Their eyes met briefly, a world of unspoken communication passing between them. Then slowly Xavier placed his revolver on the ground. "Wise decision," Williams smiled thinly. "Now, Mrs. Norton, the documents you took from your husband's desk. Hand them over." "So you can destroy the evidence of your fraud," Valerie challenged, finding courage in desperation. "I know what you did. To Robert, to others before him." William's smile vanished. "Your husband was a fool who didn't recognize opportunity when it presented itself. I offered him partnership. He chose principles instead. A mistake you're repeating." "Robert discovered you were stealing from your investors," Valerie realized aloud, pieces falling into place. "That's why you killed him." A flash of surprise crossed William's face, quickly masked. "Accidents happen, Mrs. Norton, perhaps more frequently around those who can't mind their own business." He gestured with his gun. "The documents, now." Xavier had been subtly shifting his position, placing himself between Valerie and the men above. Now he called out loudly, "Help, robbery, murder." His voice carried to the railroad camp. Heads turned, work paused, men began moving toward the commotion. Williams cursed, raising his gun. "Shut him up, Reed." Reed fired, but Xavier was already moving, diving toward Valerie and knocking her down as the bullet whistled overhead. In the same motion, he retrieved his revolver from the ground with lightning speed. His first shot caught Reed in the shoulder, spinning him from the saddle. His second struck Williams' horse, causing the animal to rear in panic, nearly unseating its rider. Workers from the camp were running toward them now, some carrying tools that doubled as weapons. Williams and his remaining companion wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving Reed groaning on the ground where he had fallen. "Are you hurt?" Xavier asked urgently, helping Valerie to her feet. She shook her head, too stunned for words. Construction workers surrounded them, faces curious and concerned. Among them was a man wearing a foreman's badge. "What in tarnation is going on here?" the foreman demanded. Xavier straightened, his manner shifting to one of calm authority. "Sir, I'm pursuing dangerous criminals wanted for fraud, arson, and attempted murder. This lady's home was burned yesterday as part of a land-grabbing scheme. That man," he pointed to Reed, who was attempting to crawl away, "is one of the perpetrators." Two burly workers moved to secure Reed, who offered no resistance, his face pale with pain and fear. "This true, madam?" the foreman asked Valerie. "Every word," she confirmed. "These men burned my home and tried to kill us to cover up their crimes," the foreman frowned. "That's Williams and his crowd, ain't it? Always thought they were slippery as eels." He turned to one of his men. "Ride to Fargo. Fetch Sheriff Tanner. Tell him we've got trouble that needs his attention." As the messenger departed, Xavier kept his gun trained on Reed, who had given up his escape attempt and sat slumped on the ground, blood seeping through the fingers clutching his wounded shoulder. "You're finished, Reed," Xavier said quietly. "Williams has abandoned you. Make it easier on yourself. Tell the truth about what happened to Robert Norton and the others." Reed's eyes darted fearfully between Xavier and the crowd of hostile workers. "Williams will kill me," he muttered. "He'll have to get through a prison wall first," Xavier replied. "But only if you talk. Otherwise, you hang alone while he escapes." Indecision warred on Reed's face. Finally, defeat won out. "It wasn't supposed to be murder," he said, voice barely audible. "Just accidents, enough to pressure them into selling." He looked at Valerie, shame evident in his eyes. "Your husband figured out Williams was embezzling from the cattle investment. He threatened to expose him. Williams couldn't let that happen. So he killed him," Valerie said, her voice steady despite the grief resurfacing like a physical pain. Reed nodded miserably. "Made it look like a horse threw him. Williams has always been good with animals, knows how to spook them just right." The confession hung in the air, witnessed by a dozen railroad workers. Whatever happened now, Williams' crimes were exposed. Even a corrupt sheriff couldn't sweep this under the rug. The railroad camp offered them shelter, food, and crude but effective medical attention for both Xavier's arm and Reed's more serious wound. By late afternoon, Sheriff Tanner arrived with 2 deputies, his expression grim as he took statements from Valerie, Xavier, and the witnesses. To Xavier's evident surprise, the sheriff showed no inclination to dismiss their accusations. "Been waiting years to catch Williams at something that would stick," Tanner explained as he secured Reed for transport back to town. "Man's been too clever by half, always operating just outside what I could prove. But arson and attempted murder, that I can work with." "Williams is still out there," Xavier reminded him. Likely gathering his remaining men to flee the territory. Tanner nodded. I've already telegraphed descriptions to every law enforcement office within 100 miles, and I'll send a wire to Marshal Donovan in Bismarck. This has grown beyond my jurisdiction. By evening, they had been escorted to Fargo, where Sheriff Tanner installed Valerie in a hotel room under guard. Xavier, to his credit, insisted on staying nearby, taking a room across the hall. Williams is desperate now, he told her before they parted for the night. That makes him more dangerous than ever. Stay vigilant. Alone in her room, Valerie found sleep impossible despite her exhaustion. Her mind replayed Reed's confession, the confirmation of what she had begun to suspect. Robert's death had been no accident. The grief she had been processing for 6 months transformed, sharpened by anger and the hunger for justice. Dawn found her at the window, watching the town come to life. A knock at her door revealed Xavier, cleanly shaven and wearing fresh clothes, though his watchful eyes showed he had slept no better than she. "Sheriff Tanner wants to see us," he said. "There have been developments." At the sheriff's office, they found an atmosphere of controlled excitement. A telegram had arrived from a town 20 miles west. Williams and the younger Hollister had been spotted trying to charter a private boat upriver. The local sheriff had detained them pending Tanner's arrival. "I'm riding out within the hour," Tanner informed them. "I'd like you both to come. Your testimony and those documents will ensure Williams can't talk his way out of this." As they prepared for the journey, Xavier pulled Valerie aside. "This isn't over yet," he cautioned. "Williams is cornered, which means he'll try anything to escape. Are you certain you want to face him?" Valerie met his gaze steadily. "I need to see this through, for Robert, for your sister, for everyone they've hurt." Something like admiration flickered in his blue eyes. "Then we face him together." The ride to Preston's Crossing took most of the day. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small river town. The local sheriff, a burly man named Graves, greeted them at his office. "Got your men locked up tight," he assured Tanner. "The older one, Williams, been demanding a lawyer since he got here. The younger one scared silent." "Any sign of the others?" Xavier asked. Graves shook his head. "Not hide nor hair. Reckon they scattered once things went south." Williams and Hollister were being held in separate cells in the town's small jail. Tanner insisted on interviewing them immediately, with Valerie and Xavier observing. Williams sat on his cot, the picture of injured dignity despite his disheveled appearance. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Valerie, then narrowed as he noticed Xavier behind her. "Sheriff Tanner," he said smoothly, "this is all an unfortunate misunderstanding. I'm being persecuted for trying to collect a legitimate debt." Tanner placed the documents from Robert's desk on the small table between them. "These say otherwise, Williams. We have evidence you falsified loan agreements, committed arson, and attempted murder, and that's just the beginning." "Preposterous," Williams scoffed, though uncertainty had crept into his expression. "Where's my lawyer? He's been summoned from Fargo," Tanner replied. "But in the meantime, you should know that Reed has been quite talkative. Seems he doesn't fancy hanging for a partner who abandoned him." Real fear flickered across Williams' face. "Reed's a drunk and a liar. Nothing he says will stand up in court." "Perhaps not alone," Xavier spoke up, stepping forward. "But combined with these documents, witness testimony, and what we find when we start investigating those other accidents and property transfers, you're finished, Williams." Williams' composure cracked. "You," he spat at Xavier. "Who are you really? What's your stake in this?" "My name is Xavier Zane. You murdered my sister and her husband in Wyoming Territory last year, Margaret and David Carter. Remember them?" Recognition dawned in Williams' eyes, followed by calculation. I remember a unfortunate business arrangement that didn't work out. Nothing more. You forced them off their land and into poverty, Xavier said, his voice deadly quiet. My sister died because of you. Her children are orphans because of you. Prove it, Williams challenged, a desperate bravado in his tone. I intend to, Xavier promised. Starting with Reed's testimony about your methods. How many others have there been, Williams? How many accidents engineered for profit? Williams' eyes darted to the cell door, seeking escape that wasn't there. I want my lawyer, he repeated, but the confidence had leached from his voice. They interviewed young Hollister next, who crumbled under questioning, confirming everything Reed had said and more. By the time they finished, even Tanner looked shaken by the extent of Williams' operation. 5 properties that we know of, he summarized as they left the jail. 5 families destroyed for profit, and those are just the ones we can connect directly to Williams. Night had fallen completely. Graves offered them rooms at the town's small hotel, with deputies stationed outside as a precaution. As they walked through the quiet streets, Valerie found herself unusually conscious of Xavier beside her, his presence a solid comfort in the darkness. What happens now? She asked. Justice, he replied simply. Williams and his men will stand trial. With the evidence we have, they'll hang or spend their lives in prison. And you, what will you do when this is over? Xavier was silent for a moment. I've been focused on finding Williams for so long, I haven't thought much beyond that. He glanced at her. What about you? Will you rebuild your homestead? The question gave her pause. Until now, she hadn't considered any future beyond securing justice for Robert. The homestead represented her life with him, dreams they had shared. But those dreams had died with Robert, and the land itself now held painful memories. I don't know, she admitted. Everything I built there was connected to Robert, starting over alone. She shook her head. Perhaps it's time for a new beginning somewhere else. They had reached the hotel. In the lamplight from the windows, Xavier's expression was thoughtful. Whatever you decide, he said quietly, you won't have to face it alone, not unless you wish to. The implication of his words hung between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Valerie felt her heart quicken, confused by emotions she hadn't expected to feel again: interest, attraction, possibility. Xavier, she began, unsure what she wanted to say. A gunshot shattered the night, the bullet striking the wall inches from Xavier's head. He reacted instantly, pushing Valerie down and drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. Inside, he shouted, returning fire at a shadowy figure across the street. They scrambled through the hotel door as more shots rang out. Inside, panic erupted as guests ducked for cover. Sheriff Tanner and his deputies rushed toward the commotion, guns drawn. Carson and the elder Hollister, Xavier told Tanner as the lawman took position near the window. They must have followed us. Trying to free Williams, Tanner agreed grimly. Graves, get men around back. Don't let them near the jail. The shooting continued, a sporadic exchange that kept everyone pinned inside the hotel. Through the window, they could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 positions. They're better armed than I expected, Xavier muttered. A deputy who had circled around the building reported back breathlessly. They've already hit the jail, Sheriff. Knocked out Graves' deputy and freed Williams and the boy, Tanner cursed. They'll head for the river, it's their only way out. He turned to Xavier. You know Williams better than any of us. Where would he go? Xavier thought quickly. There's a trading post about 10 miles upriver. Isolated, known for asking few questions. He might aim for there, try to obtain supplies and horses for a longer journey. Then that's where we'll head, Tanner decided, but carefully. This feels like an ambush in the making. They organized quickly. Tanner, 2 deputies, Xavier, and despite objections, Valerie. She refused to be left behind, arguing that she had as much right as anyone to see Williams brought to justice. "I won't be a liability," she promised, accepting the revolver Tanner reluctantly offered her. They set out on horseback, following the river trail by moonlight. Xavier rode beside Valerie, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness for threats. "Stay close," he murmured. "If trouble starts, get down and find cover immediately." They had covered perhaps 5 miles when Xavier suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Ahead, just visible in the moonlight, was a copse of trees overlooking a bend in the river, a perfect spot for an ambush. "They're waiting for us," Xavier said softly. "I can feel it." Tanner nodded his agreement. "We'll circle around, come at them from behind." They dismounted, leaving one deputy with the horses, and began a careful approach through the underbrush. The night was eerily quiet, broken only by the gentle lapping of the river against its banks. They had nearly reached the copse when a twig snapped somewhere to their left. Instantly, gunfire erupted from the trees. Tanner's remaining deputy fell with a cry of pain. Xavier returned fire, pushing Valerie toward a fallen log for cover. "Stay down," he ordered, his focus entirely on the threat. Tanner was pinned behind a tree, exchanging shots with unseen assailants. "How many?" he called to Xavier. "At least 3, Xavier replied, firing methodically toward muzzle flashes. "Williams, both Hollisters, and possibly Carson." The gunfight intensified, bullets splintering bark and thudding into wood around them. Xavier's expression was grim as he reloaded. "They have the advantage of position," he told Valerie. "We need to flank them somehow." Before she could respond, a new sound reached them: hoofbeats, approaching rapidly from the direction they had come. Reinforcements from town, perhaps, but Xavier's sudden tension suggested otherwise. "More of Williams' men," he muttered. "We're caught between them." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Tanner was wounded now, clutching his arm as he continued to return fire. The deputy had crawled to their position, his leg bleeding badly. "We need to move," Xavier decided. "The river is our best chance. If we can reach that bend, there's deeper cover on the other bank." Valerie nodded, helping the injured deputy to his feet while Xavier provided covering fire. Together, they began a desperate retreat toward the water, staying low and moving in short bursts. They had almost reached the riverbank when a figure emerged from the shadows directly in their path: Williams himself, wild-eyed and disheveled, but with his gun aimed steadily at Valerie's heart. "Far enough," he snarled. "Drop the guns, all of you." Xavier froze, his revolver half raised. Williams' finger tightened on the trigger. "I said drop it, Zane, or the widow dies right now." Time seemed to slow as Valerie saw Xavier make his decision. He would not surrender, not to Williams, and in that instant she knew what she had to do. She lunged sideways, knocking the injured deputy clear as she drew her own revolver. Williams' shot went wide as he adjusted his aim toward her unexpected movement. Before he could fire again, Xavier's bullet found its mark, striking Williams squarely in the chest. The impact threw him backward. He staggered, disbelief etched on his face, then collapsed to his knees. His gun fell from nerveless fingers as he toppled face forward into the mud of the riverbank. A sudden silence fell, broken only by the sounds of approaching riders, not Williams' men after all, but Sheriff Graves and a posse from town, drawn by the gunfire. In the confusion that followed, the remaining outlaws were quickly captured or fled into the wilderness. Tanner's wounds were tended, the dead accounted for. Williams was confirmed dead, justice delivered not by the hangman's noose but by Xavier's bullet. As dawn broke, Valerie found herself sitting beside Xavier on the porch of a small hunting cabin where the wounded had been brought for treatment. They watched the sun rise over the river, painting the water gold and crimson. "It's over," Xavier said quietly. "Really over." Valerie nodded, a curious emptiness inside her where vengeance had burned just hours before. "Robert has justice. Your sister too." "Justice, yes," Xavier agreed. "But it doesn't bring them back." They sat in companionable silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Valerie spoke. "What will you do now?" she asked again, echoing her question from the night before. Xavier turned to look at her, his blue eyes softened by the morning light. "I've been thinking about that. For 2 years, finding Williams has been my only purpose. Now," he hesitated, "now I find myself considering possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to contemplate. Such as," he smiled slightly, "such as what it might be like to stop wandering. To build something rather than seek vengeance. To live instead of merely surviving." Valerie felt something stir within her, hope, fragile but persistent. "Where would you build this new life?" "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, "but I find myself drawn to the Dakota Territory. There's something about the land here, its openness, its possibility." Their eyes met, and Valerie saw in his gaze the same tentative hope she felt in her heart. Too soon, perhaps, to name what was growing between them, but undeniable nonetheless. "My land is still mine," she said softly. "Even with the cabin gone, the property remains. Good water, fertile soil. Too many difficult memories, perhaps," he suggested gently. She considered this, surprised to find that the sharp pain of loss had somehow transformed, becoming part of her without defining her completely. "Some," she acknowledged, "but also the foundation for something new. Robert would have wanted the land to nurture life, not to become a monument to grief." Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Rebuilding takes courage. And help," she added, her gaze steady on his. "I don't think I could do it alone." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to speak it aloud but both acknowledging its presence. "Perhaps," Xavier said carefully, "once things are settled here, I could ride out to your property. Assess the damage, help you determine what might be salvaged." "I'd appreciate that," Valerie replied, equally measured. "And perhaps, if you found the Dakota Territory to your liking, we could discuss longer-term arrangements." A smile touched his lips, reaching his eyes. "I'd like that very much, Valerie." As the sun continued its ascent, casting long shadows behind them and illuminating the path ahead, they sat together in comfortable silence, two survivors contemplating not just an ending but a beginning. The months that followed brought many changes to Valerie's life. True to his word, Xavier accompanied her back to her homestead once the legal aftermath of William's death was settled. The cabin was indeed destroyed, but the stone chimney stood like a sentinel over the charred remains, a symbol of endurance. Together, they salvaged what they could and began planning a new structure larger, sturdier, with a wide porch facing the sunrise. Xavier proved as skilled with hammer and saw as he was with a revolver, his hands crafting with care what they had once destroyed with precision. As summer turned to autumn, a new cabin rose on the foundation of the old. Neighbors from miles around came to help with the raising, curious about the quiet gunman who had taken up residence in Valerie Norton's barn loft, and who looked at the widow with such careful attention. Gossip swirled, of course, but Valerie found she cared less than she might have expected. She was learning to measure her life by her own standards, not by the whispers of others. Xavier stayed, initially as a hired hand, helping to restore the small ranch to working order. A modest herd of cattle was purchased, fields planted, fences mended. They worked side by side from dawn till dusk, their partnership built on respect and growing affection. In the evenings, they would sit on the new porch, watching the stars emerge. Sometimes they talked of the past of Robert and Margaret, of lives lost and justice gained. More often, they spoke of the future improvements to the property, livestock to acquire, crops to plant when spring returned. As winter approached, bringing with it the prospect of close quarters and long nights, the nature of their relationship required acknowledgement. It was Xavier who finally broached the subject on a crisp November evening as they sat before the fireplace. "Valerie," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "I've been thinking about the coming winter." She smiled slightly. "I imagine we all have. The almanac predicts a harsh one." "That's not quite what I meant." He set aside his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "The barn loft is already growing cold at night. By December, it will be barely habitable." "Are you requesting better accommodations, Mr. Zane?" she teased, though her heart had begun to beat faster. "In a manner of speaking." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "But I don't wish to presume, or to compromise your reputation further than my presence here already has." Valerie considered her next words carefully. "Xavier, you've been here 4 months now. In that time, you've helped me rebuild not just my home, but my life. You've asked for nothing in return except the opportunity to start anew yourself." "It's been my privilege," he said quietly. "And my great fortune," she replied. She took a deep breath. "If you're asking whether I would consider a more permanent arrangement between us, the answer is yes, I would." Relief and joy transformed his face, making him look younger than she had ever seen him. "I've been afraid to hope," he admitted. "Afraid that the shadow of vengeance still clung to me, making me unworthy of the happiness I've found here. With you." Valerie reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "We've both lived in the shadow of loss, Xavier. Perhaps that's why we recognize in each other the same hunger for light, for life." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I love you, Valerie," he said simply. "I never expected to find love again in this life, certainly not while pursuing vengeance. Yet here you are, offering me more than justice, offering me a future." Tears blurred her vision as emotions she had kept carefully controlled for so long finally broke free. "I love you too," she whispered. "And I would be honored to build that future with you, to transform this land into the home it was always meant to be." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Fargo, Sheriff Tanner standing as witness. The ceremony was simple, the celebration afterward more boisterous as neighbors and townspeople gathered to wish them well. As they rode home together through the first snowfall of the season, Valerie looked over at her new husband, still marveling at the unexpected turn her life had taken. From the depths of loss and betrayal had come this second chance, this opportunity to love again. Xavier caught her gaze and smiled, the hardness that had once dominated his features now softened by happiness. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Zane?" The new name sent a pleasant shiver through her. "I'm thinking how strange life is, how the worst moments can lead eventually to the best. Like a river finding its way around obstacles," he agreed, "changing course when necessary but always moving forward." As their homestead came into view, smoke rising cheerfully from the chimney where a neighbor had kindled a fire in anticipation of their return, Valerie felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This land, once soaked in sorrow, was being reborn through love and determination. "Welcome home," she said softly. Xavier reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "Home," he repeated, the word carrying all the weight of their shared journey and the promise of their future together. "Yes, at last." The years passed, seasons turning one into another with the rhythm that governs all rural life. The small ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, the herd growing, crops flourishing. They added a large barn, a smokehouse, expanded the corral. The rumored railroad did indeed come through the eastern edge of their property, bringing with it compensation that allowed further improvements. Children came too: first a son they named David Robert, after both their lost loved ones, and 2 years later a daughter, Margaret Rose. The house that had once seemed too quiet now echoed with laughter and running feet. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, teaching his children to ride almost before they could walk, telling them stories of faraway places he had seen in his wandering days. The gunfighter receded into memory, replaced by the rancher, the husband, the father who read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. Valerie watched this transformation with wonder and gratitude. She too had changed, growing into a confidence she had never fully possessed even during her first marriage. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone, not just a ranch or a family, but a sanctuary where healing had triumphed over hurt. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, they stood together on the porch at sunset, watching their children playing with the new collie pup in the yard. "Any regrets?" Xavier asked, his arm around her waist. Valerie leaned into his embrace. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Though sometimes I can hardly believe the path that brought us here. From tragedy to triumph," he mused, "from vengeance to forgiveness, from strangers to this." He gestured to encompass their home, their children, their life together. "Would you have imagined this outcome that day you rode up to my burning homestead?" she asked. Xavier's laugh was warm against her hair. "Never. I was still too consumed by the past to see any future clearly. You changed that, Valerie. You showed me there was still good worth fighting for in this world." They watched as David helped Margaret onto the porch swing, the two children giggling as they set it in motion. "We've been blessed," Valerie said softly. "Beyond measure," Xavier agreed. "And I intend to spend every remaining day of my life ensuring that blessing continues." As darkness fell, they called the children in for supper, moving from the porch into the warmth of their home. Outside, stars emerged in the vast Dakota sky, bearing silent witness to the enduring power of love to transform lives, to heal wounds, to create light where once there had been only shadow. On that land, where once a desperate widow had faced down threats with nothing but courage and a mysterious stranger's help, a family now thrived, living testament to the promise that even in the darkest moments, hope persists, and new beginnings await those brave enough to claim them.